There is a shoe in a museum in Toronto that most people walk past without understanding what they're looking at. It's a Persian riding boot, roughly 1,000 years old, made of leather, functional, designed for a specific mechanical purpose, and it has a heel. A raised, angled, distinctly elevated heel that lifts the back of the foot above the front in a silhouette that any modern person would immediately recognize. Not because they've seen a Persian riding boot before, because they've seen it on every sidewalk, in every office, on every red carpet, on the feet of every woman they've ever watched walk in a shape that the modern world has convinced itself is feminine. The heel isn't feminine. It was never feminine. For roughly 900 of the 1,000 years that heeled shoes have existed, they were worn exclusively by men, soldiers, aristocrats, kings. The most powerful, most masculine, most martially aggressive men in the societies that produced them. The high heel is a male invention, designed for male purposes, worn by men as a symbol of male power for nearly a millennium. And the transfer of the heel from the male foot to the female foot, which occurred in a specific period for specific reasons, is one of the most revealing and least examined episodes in the history of how power controls bodies through what it puts on them. Start with the origin, because the origin tells you everything the modern world doesn't want you to know about what the heel actually is. Persia, roughly the 10th century. The raised heel was developed for mounted combat. The function was mechanical and precise. A cavalryman standing in stirrups needed his foot to lock into the stirrup at the ball, while the heel prevented the foot from sliding through. The raised heel caught the stirrup. It anchored the rider. It allowed him to stand in the saddle, turn his body, and fire a bow with accuracy while his horse moved at speed. The heel wasn't fashion. It was weapons technology, an engineering solution to a combat problem. The raised back of the shoe existed because it kept the warrior alive and lethal on horseback. And the Persians who wore these heels were among the most formidable cavalry forces in the ancient and medieval world. The raised heel was associated with military power, with horsemanship, with the aristocratic warrior class that ruled Persian society from the saddle. The heel meant you rode, and riding meant you fought, and fighting meant you ruled. This raises a simple but critical question. How did a piece of military technology designed for mounted Persian warriors end up on the feet of women in European cities 3 centuries later? The deeper I went, the more the transfer revealed itself not as a gradual fashion evolution, but as a series of specific, deliberate, politically motivated adoptions and abandonments that used the shoe as a tool of social control at every stage. The silence was deafening. The heel arrived in Europe at the turn of the 17th century. Persian diplomats visiting European courts wore their heeled riding boots. European aristocrats, who were obsessed with Persian military culture the way modern Americans are obsessed with special forces aesthetics, adopted the heel immediately, not as footwear, as a symbol. The European aristocrat who wore a heeled shoe was communicating something specific to every person who saw him. I am a horseman. I am a warrior. I am of the class that fights from the saddle. I am not a peasant who walks in flat shoes through mud. I am elevated. Literally. And the elevation became the message. Within decades, the heel had detached from its military function and become a pure status marker. You didn't need to ride a horse to wear heels. You needed to be the kind of person who could ride a horse. The aristocratic kind, the wealthy kind, the powerful kind. The heel communicated class. Height communicated power. And the higher the heel, the more power it communicated. Because the higher the heel, the less functional the shoe became, and the less functional the shoe, the more clearly it demonstrated that the wearer didn't need to do anything as vulgar as walk efficiently. The heel said, "I don't work. I don't walk. I am carried by my status the way the horse carries my body." Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, the most powerful monarch in 17th century Europe. Pull up his portraits, look at his feet, red-heeled shoes with heels over 4 inches high. Louis didn't just wear heels, he codified them. He made the red heel a symbol of court membership. Only those in the king's favor were permitted to wear red heels. The shoe wasn't an accessory, it was a credential, a visible marker of proximity to power, worn on the body, regulated by the crown, as politically significant as any title or land grant. As if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand. Now here's where the transfer begins. Because women in the early 17th century started wearing heels too. And the reason is documented and specific. Women adopted the heel as part of a broader fashion movement in which women's clothing incorporated elements of masculine dress, the same way women in the 20th century adopted trousers. The heel on a woman's foot in the 1630s was a statement. I am claiming the symbols of masculine power. I am wearing what men wear. The heel was borrowed upward, from the powerful to the aspiring, from the masculine to the feminine as an act of appropriation. And for a brief period, roughly 1630 to 1700, both men and women wore heels. The shoe was unisex, the symbol was shared. The power it communicated was accessible to anyone wealthy enough to own the shoe. This was the period of the heel's maximum social function. It communicated class across gender. It elevated the wearer, male or female, above the unheeled masses. The shoe was doing what shoes have always done in hierarchical societies, making power visible on the body. Then something changed, and the change is where the story becomes dark. The deeper I went into the fashion history of the early 1700s, the more I found that the divergence of men's and women's heels wasn't a natural evolution of taste. It was a deliberate restructuring of what the heel communicated, driven by a philosophical transformation in how European society understood the difference between men and women. The Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. The period when European intellectual culture divided the world into rational and irrational, scientific and superstitious, masculine and feminine. The Enlightenment didn't just reorganize knowledge, it reorganized gender. Men were rational, women were emotional, men were practical, women were decorative, men were functional, women were ornamental. And the clothing that each gender wore was redesigned to communicate these newly rigid categories. Men's fashion simplified, the heels lowered, the colors darkened, the ornamentation diminished. The masculine ideal shifted from the glittering peacock of Louis XIV's court to the sober, practical, functional man of the Enlightenment. A man in high heels was no longer powerful, he was frivolous. He was wasting his rationality on decoration. The heel became incompatible with the new masculine ideal, and men abandoned it. Women's fashion went the other direction. The heels stayed. They narrowed. They became less stable, less functional, more purely ornamental. The wide, blocky heel that had served the Persian cavalryman and the European aristocrat was replaced by the thin, tapered heel that served no mechanical purpose whatsoever. The heel was redesigned explicitly to be impractical, to communicate not power but decorativeness, not martial capability but physical delicacy, not I ride and fight but I am displayed. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across every element of women's fashion that was restructured during the same period. The corset, which restricted breathing and movement. The crinoline, which restricted physical space. The bound foot in China, which restricted walking entirely, and the high heel, which restricted gait, restricted balance, restricted speed, restricted every form of physical movement that might allow the wearer to function as an independent physical agent in the world. Here's where the biomechanics become impossible to ignore, because the high heel doesn't just change how you look, it changes how your body works. And the changes are not cosmetic, they're structural. Measurable. documented in the orthopedic and biomechanical literature with a thoroughness that makes the continued promotion of high heels one of the most remarkable examples of known harm being marketed as desirable in the history of consumer products. Go read the biomechanical research. A 2-inch heel shifts the body's center of gravity forward. The pelvis tilts anteriorly to compensate. The lumbar spine increases its lordotic curve. The knees flex slightly and rotate inward. The calf muscles shorten. The Achilles tendon contracts. The plantar fascia bears increased load. The metatarsal heads absorb pressure that the heel was designed to carry. Every joint from the lumbar spine to the toes is repositioned by the elevation of the heel. The entire kinetic chain of the lower body is deformed. And the deformation isn't temporary. Women who wear heels regularly undergo measurable structural changes. The calf muscles shorten permanently. The Achilles tendon thickens and loses flexibility. The lumbar spine develops chronic lordosis. The metatarsal joints develop arthritis at rates significantly higher than in flat shoe wearers. Bunions, hammer toes, Morton's neuroma, plantar fasciitis, knee osteoarthritis, lower back pain. The list of conditions associated with regular heel wearing reads like a catalog of the most common orthopedic complaints in the female population. The deeper I went into the medical literature, the more the high heel started to look less like a fashion choice and more like an engineering project. An engineering project whose output is a body that can't run, can't fight, can't flee, can't stand for long periods without pain, can't walk at speed without risking injury, a body that is, by the structural constraints imposed by the shoe, physically dependent, physically limited, physically contained. The heel doesn't make the leg look longer, it makes the body less capable. And the culture that promotes the heel presents the incapability as beauty. Here's where the thread connects to the deeper pattern. Because the transfer of the heel from men to women wasn't just a fashion change, it was a technology transfer. A tool that had been designed to enhance capability, the Persian cavalryman's stirrup heel, was redesigned to reduce capability and then assigned to the gender that the redesigning culture needed to control. The Persian heel made the man more powerful. It locked him into his stirrup. It stabilized his combat platform. It enhanced his lethality. The same structural principle, elevating the heel above the toe, was preserved in the women's heel. But the function was inverted. The elevation that stabilized the warrior destabilized the woman. The height that anchored the rider unbalanced the walker. The technology that enhanced masculine capability was recalibrated to restrict feminine capability. The same engineering, the opposite purpose. And the recalibration was so successful, so thoroughly normalized, so completely embedded in the culture's definition of feminine beauty, that women adopted the restriction voluntarily, enthusiastically, as an expression of identity rather than a recognition of constraint. The heel became something women chose, something women wanted, something women associated with power, with confidence, with professional competence, with sexual attractiveness. The tool of restriction became, through the alchemy of cultural normalization, a symbol of empowerment. The deeper I went, the more this inversion looked like the masterpiece of the entire operation. Because the most effective constraint is the one the constrained person defends. The corset was eventually recognized as oppressive and abandoned. The bound foot was recognized as barbaric and prohibited. But the high heel persists. It persists because the culture succeeded in convincing the constrained population that the constraint is a choice, that the limitation is a power, that the pain is a price worth paying for the beauty that the pain produces. And the beauty the pain produces is the beauty of incapability. The shortened stride, the tilted pelvis, the accentuated curve of the lumbar spine, the elevation on the balls of the feet that produces the calf tension that the culture has sexualized. Each of these aesthetic effects is a biomechanical limitation repackaged as attractiveness. The culture finds attractive precisely the features that indicate physical restriction. The aesthetic preference isn't natural, it's engineered over 3 centuries of deliberate reassignment of a male power technology to a female constraint function. I'm not telling you to throw away your heels. I'm not telling you that wearing them makes you a victim of patriarchal engineering. I'm telling you that the high heel was invented by Persian cavalrymen as a weapon of war, that it was adopted by European men as a symbol of aristocratic power, that it was transferred to women during a specific historical period when gender roles were being rigidly restructured by Enlightenment philosophy, that the transfer involved a deliberate redesign from a functional tool that enhanced capability to a decorative object that restricted it, that the biomechanical effects of the modern women's heel are documented, severe, and progressive, that the conditions produced by regular heel wearing generate billions of dollars in orthopedic and podiatric revenue annually. I'm asking why a piece of Persian military technology is on your feet. I'm asking why the version of it that you're wearing was specifically redesigned to be less functional than the version men wore for centuries. I'm asking why the culture that transferred the heel from men to women simultaneously transferred it from functional to decorative, from stabilizing to destabilizing, from a tool of power to a tool of constraint. I'm asking why the shoe that once kept a warrior in his saddle now keeps you off balance, and why you were taught to call that beauty, handed a heel, and told it was empowerment.